Power Rangers Zeo had the best setup in franchise history. A clean break from mighty Morphin, brand new powers, a villain threat that actually felt like it was escalating. And then the show aired, and something was off. Not wrong exactly, just hollow in places. Like a team that looked right on paper, but never quite felt like family on screen. And I've been sitting with that for a while. Because I think I know why. 3 of the original 5 were gone. Jason, Zack, and Trini, the Red Ranger, the Black Ranger, the Yellow Ranger, handed their powers to Rocky, Adam, and Aisha at the end of Season 2, walked off to a peace conference in Switzerland, and never came back. Not to Zeo, at least. Well, 2 of them. And the show moved forward without them. But what if it hadn't? What if Austin St. John, Walter Jones, and Thuy Trang had stayed? What if the whole original lineup, minus Tommy becoming white, which we have to rethink, had walked through that power transfer and come out the other side as Zeo Rangers? What does that version of the show look like? What storylines open up? What gets better? What gets more complicated? And how far does the ripple go? That's what this video is. Not a recap of what happened. If you want that, the Zeo Deep Dive is on the channel. This is the alternate timeline, the road not taken. And I think when you follow it all the way through, it changes a lot more than just the cast list. Now, let's build the alternate timeline. To understand what we're actually changing here, you need to remember what the franchise looked like in 1993 and 1994. When Jason, Zack, and Trini left at the start of Mighty Morphin Season 2, the show was at its commercial peak. It was a ratings machine. The original 5, Austin St. John as Jason, Walter Jones as Zack, Thuy Trang as Trini, Amy Jo Johnson as Kimberly, and David Yost as Billy, were the face of a cultural phenomenon that Saban had not fully anticipated. The toys were selling faster than they could be produced. The lunchboxes, the bedsheets, the backpacks. These characters were on everything, and 3 of the 5 walked away from it. The official line was the peace conference, which as cover stories go, is paper thin. The real picture, and this is well documented in the fan community and corroborated by various cast accounts over the years, is that there was a pay dispute. Austin St. John, Walter Jones, and Thuy Trang were not receiving the same compensation as their screen time and merchandising value would seem to warrant. They asked for more, and Saban said no. So they left. The characters were written out quickly. The new actors, Steve Cardenas as Rocky, Johnny Young Bosch as Adam, Karan Ashley as Aisha, were introduced in a 2-part arc called The Power Transfer, and the machine kept rolling. Now here's the thing people don't always say clearly. The replacements were fine. Rocky, Adam, and Aisha are not bad characters. Johnny Young Bosch especially. Adam Park has a quiet depth that grew significantly in Zeo. But they were never given the weight that the original 3 carried simply by existing. Jason had 2 years of established history. Zack had a personality that was kinetic and genuine and unlike anyone else on Saturday morning television in 1993. And Trini was the steady one, the thoughtful one, the person who made the team feel grounded. When they left, the show lost something it never fully replaced. And that loss followed the franchise all the way into Power Rangers Zeo. So what would have had to change for them to stay? The pay dispute is the core of it. If Saban offers better contracts, not identical to the later cast necessarily, but equitable, reflective of what the original 3 were actually worth to the franchise, then Austin St. John, Walter Jones, and Thuy Trang are still in the building when Zeo starts production. That's the fulcrum. Everything else follows from there. Let me be specific about what fans actually remember of the Zeo cast situation, because I think the memory has gotten a little compressed over time. Zeo had Tommy, now played by Jason David Frank, who passed in November 2022, and whose contribution to this franchise cannot be overstated, as the Zeo Ranger 5 Red. It had Billy, who became the team's technical support rather than an active ranger. It had Kat as the Pink Ranger replacing Kimberly. It had Rocky, Adam, and Tanya, Nakia Baris, who replaced Aisha mid-season in a storyline that sent Aisha to Africa to help a sick animal community, which is one of the stranger character exits the show ever produced. And it had Jason returning later in the season as the Gold Ranger. That Gold Ranger arc. Let's talk about that for a second, because it's directly relevant to the what if. When the Gold Ranger powers arrive on Earth, the obvious candidate to receive them is Billy. But Billy's body can't handle the Gold Ranger energy. There's a whole storyline around the incompatibility. So Jason comes back to take them. Austin St. John returned, which was a legitimate moment. Fans felt it. But the Gold Ranger powers were also slowly destroying Jason's own energy, and by the end of the season, he had to give them up to Trey of Triforia. the alien they'd originally come from. In the actual show, that arc is good but rushed. Jason is back, but he's not integrated into the team the way he should be. He shows up, he has a health crisis, he hands the powers back, he's gone again. It's a guest arc in a season that should have been his home. In our alternate timeline, if Jason never left, there's no Gold Ranger arc as it exists. Which is actually interesting, because it forces the writers to do something they were clearly avoiding. Give Jason a permanent, defined role in the Zeo team from the start. And that changes everything about how the power structure of that team is written. Here's where the production reality gets genuinely complicated, and I want to be precise about this because it's easy to oversimplify. Power Rangers Zeo adapted from Shiriki Sentai O-Ranger, which had 5 Rangers with a numerical system, Zeo Ranger I through V. The suits were already designed. The Sentai footage was already shot. The adaptation team was working with that footage and building an American cast around it. So the Zeo team structure, 5 numbered Rangers plus the Gold Ranger, was largely fixed by what the Sentai gave them. If the original 3 stay, you're not redesigning the power system. You still get 5 Zeo Rangers and the Gold Ranger. What changes is who's wearing which suit. In the actual show, Tommy is Zeo Ranger 5 Red, Kat is Zeo Ranger I Pink, Tanya is Zeo Ranger 2 Yellow, Rocky is Zeo Ranger 3 Blue, Adam is Zeo Ranger 4 Green. In the alternate timeline, you'd presumably have Jason returning as Red, which, look, some people are going to push back on that. Tommy was Red for Zeo. Tommy being the leader, by that point, had been established for 2 seasons. But here's my take. If Jason never left, he and Tommy would have had to negotiate the leadership question on screen, and that tension alone is worth the price of admission. Think about what that looks like. Jason was the original Red Ranger. He was the leader before Tommy ever showed up. Tommy became White Ranger, became co-leader, and Jason left before that power dynamic fully played out between them. In our alternate timeline, they're both here. Both experienced leaders. And the show has to actually deal with that, instead of defaulting to, Tommy is the new center of everything. My guess for how the writers would handle it, Tommy stays Red. The franchise had invested too much in Jason David Frank's marketability to move him off that spot. But Jason, Austin St. John's Jason, gets a clearly defined second-in-command role that the show actually writes for, instead of the vague team captain at the peace conference handwave they gave us in the real timeline. Now for Zack and Trini, you'd need to rearrange the Zeo Ranger assignments. The most natural fit based on their Mighty Morphin identities would be Zack taking one of the numbered spots, 2 or 4, and Trini taking another. Adam and Tanya in this version simply don't exist in the cast, which is a real loss for Johnny Yon Bosch and Nakia Baris, both of whom grew into genuinely good performers on this show. But that's the alternate timeline. Not every change is an upgrade across the board. What you gain is continuity of relationship. The reason the original 5 felt like a team was because they'd had 2 years to develop actual dynamic on screen. The Season 2 replacements, and especially the Zeo cast, always had to work against the deficit of being new. Rocky, Adam, and Aisha came in as a unit and took time to integrate. In Zeo, Tanya was brand new and spent a significant portion of the season establishing herself. If the original 3 are there from day 1 of Zeo, you have 6 people, including Billy in support and Tommy leading, who all know each other, who have actual history, who can reference things that happened to them together. The show doesn't have to do the work of rebuilding team chemistry from scratch. It already has it. Now let's get into the real argument, because this is where I want to take a position that might surprise you. The conventional fan take is that keeping the original cast would have made Power Rangers Zeo definitively better. More emotional weight, more continuity, more payoff for the Mighty Morphin fans who'd been watching since 1993. And I think that's broadly true, but I don't think it's the whole picture. Here's what people underestimate. The original cast staying would have made Power Rangers Zeo significantly more complicated to write, in ways that the show's writers may not have been equipped to handle. Let me explain. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was not a character-driven show. It was a toy commercial, with surprisingly charismatic leads. The emotional beats that landed, and there were real ones. Tommy's Green Ranger arc, Billy's development over 3 seasons, Kim's letter to Tommy. Those moments worked because the show's general shallowness made the rare, genuine moment feel earned by contrast. Zeo was trying to grow up a little. It was leaning into serialized storytelling, longer villain arcs, the Machine Empire as a consistent threat. It was better written than Mighty Morphin in a lot of ways. But the show was still fundamentally structured around 1 or 2 characters per episode. It didn't have the infrastructure for 6 or 7 main cast members, all of whom had histories and relationships that deserved attention. Even in the real timeline, with a new cast, individual Rangers could go entire arcs without meaningful screen time. With the original 3 back, you suddenly have Jason's history with Tommy, Zack's energy that would need to be channeled into actual storylines, and Trini's presence, which was always underwritten, even in the show that was supposed to be hers. Trini was consistently one of the least serviced characters in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The show never quite figured out what to do with her depth. Would Zeo have done better? Genuinely uncertain. I'd like to think so, but I can't promise it. What I can say is this: the ceiling would have been higher. Not because the original cast was automatically better at everything, but because the emotional investment that audiences had in those characters was enormous and largely unexploited. Jason's return as the Gold Ranger in the actual show proved that. The moment he appeared, people responded, even though the story around it was rushed. Imagine what a full season of that investment could have looked like, properly built. That's the version of Zeo I want to see. Not just the original cast standing in new suits, but a show that uses what we already feel about these people to tell a longer, slower, more emotionally grounded story about a team that's been through something and comes out the other side as something different. Let me bring up something that I don't hear in this conversation nearly enough. The Billy question. In actual Zeo, Billy Cranston, David Yost, doesn't become a Ranger. He's the support guy, the tech genius. He helps the team, he builds things, he's there. And that was a deliberate choice, because there wasn't a Zeo Ranger role written for him in the Sentai footage they were adapting from. Billy wasn't going to be in a suit. Here's the thing about that, though. In a world where the original 5 are all present, Jason, Zack, Trini, Kimberly, Tommy, and then the Zeo Crystal distributes power to 5 Rangers, Billy is still left out. He was always going to be the one who didn't get a new power set. And in the real show, that actually worked as character development. Billy's whole arc in Zeo is about finding value outside of being a Ranger. That's genuinely interesting and mostly well executed. But if the original 3 are all present, and Billy and Kimberly are also— wait, Kimberly, let me deal with that. In the real timeline, Amy Jo Johnson left during Mighty Morphin Season 3. Kimberly mailed Tommy a Dear John letter, one of the most analyzed pieces of children's television ever written, somehow, and Kat replaced her as the Pink Ranger. So if we're keeping Jason, Zack, and Trini, do we keep Kimberly too? I'm going to say no deliberately, because the pay dispute that prompted the departures was specific to the original 3. Kimberly's exit was different. Amy Jo Johnson had other opportunities she was pursuing, and the circumstances aren't the same. Kat replacing Kim was on a separate track. So in our alternate timeline, Kat is still the Zeo Ranger Y Pink. That's actually fine. That keeps one piece of the actual Zeo cast intact, keeps the Kim arc as it was in late Mighty Morphin, and means the alternate timeline doesn't have to juggle 7 returning original cast members. So the Zeo team in our version looks like this: Kat as Zeo 1 Pink, Trini as Zeo 2 Yellow, Jason as a strong supporting Ranger, Zeo 4, maybe, or we rework the numbering, and Zack somewhere in the lineup. Billy's still in the support role, still doing the tech work. It's a team that feels coherent and connected in a way the actual Zeo team, for all its qualities, never quite achieved. Now, the Gold Ranger. In the alternate timeline, the Gold Ranger arc has to change completely. In the real show, Jason returned because the Gold Ranger needed a host, and Billy couldn't hold the power. The whole drama was predicated on Jason being absent. If he's not absent, the setup doesn't work. So either the Gold Ranger goes to a cast member who was never connected to it in the real show, Zack, interestingly, becomes a possibility, and there's something genuinely exciting about Walter Jones getting that arc. Or the Gold Ranger arc doesn't happen at all, and those story resources get redistributed into something else. I actually think giving the Gold Ranger power to Zack is the most interesting choice the alternate timeline could make. Here's why. In Mighty Morphin, Zack was the comic relief, the dancer, the guy with the attitude and the energy. He was beloved, but he was also the character who got the silliest plots. Hip-hop Keto as a fighting style. Putting him in the Gold Ranger seat, giving Zack a power set that's separate, visually distinct, narratively elevated. That's a redemption arc for a character who was chronically underserved. Walter Jones' charisma was never the problem. The writers just never knew what to do with him. Give him the Gold Ranger powers, give him the energy drain storyline that Austin St. John navigated in the real show, and suddenly you have a Walter Jones performance arc that people would still be talking about. I genuinely believe that. Here's the thing people usually get wrong in this conversation, and it's the most important point in the whole video. Most people frame this as the original cast staying would have saved Power Rangers Zeo, as if Zeo needed saving. It didn't. Zeo was actually a good season, probably the best written version of the Zordon era format. The Machine Empire was a compelling villain group, King Mondo had genuine menace, and the late season twist involving Lord Zed and Rita reclaiming their territory was unexpected and effective. The show was working. The real question isn't whether the original cast would have saved Zeo. It's whether keeping them would have saved what came after. Because here's the trajectory. After Zeo, you get Power Rangers Turbo. And Turbo is where the franchise started to lose its footing. The tone got younger, the villains got weaker, and the cast eventually turned over almost entirely. By the end of Turbo, Tommy, Kat, Rocky, and Adam had all left, replaced by a new team that included a 12-year-old as the Blue Ranger. If the original three are in the building for Zeo, they almost certainly carry through to Turbo, and that changes Turbo's entire character. You'd still have the power handover. The franchise was clearly committed to refresh the cast, but you'd be handing over to a new generation from a place of genuine strength, rather than from a Zeo lineup that was already fragmented. The emotional stakes of the Turbo handover would have been higher. The new cast would have had more to live up to. The audience would have had more to grieve. And here's the thought that I find genuinely interesting. If the original three are present through Zeo and into Turbo, then the cast exit that actually happened in Turbo, the one this channel covered not long ago, becomes even more dramatic. Austin St. John, Walter Jones, and Tui Trang leaving at the end of Turbo, instead of in Season 2 of Mighty Morphin? That's a different weight entirely. That's 5 years of continuous characters exiting all at once. The show doesn't quietly recast. It has to actually say goodbye. That scene, if it had existed, might have been the emotional high point of the entire Zordon era. And we didn't get it. Because the negotiations broke down in 1993, and 3 people left, and the show never acknowledged what it lost. I want to say one more thing before the verdict. And this is the piece I keep coming back to personally. I grew up watching Trini. Not the Yellow Ranger as a concept, Trini specifically. The way she held herself in scenes, quieter than everyone else, watching, she was the one who listened. In an ensemble full of big personalities, she was the person who noticed things. And the show gave her so little to work with. There was an episode, Foul Play in the Sky, where she had something approaching a spotlight moment, filling in as a pilot. There was her interest in martial arts. There were flashes. But the character never got the story she deserved. Tui Trang left the show in 1994 and passed away in September 2001. What she gave to Trini in the short time she had is still visible every time someone watches those first 2 seasons. And I genuinely believe that a version of Power Rangers Zeo with Trini as a full cast member would have finally, belatedly, given that character the space she deserved. That's not a plot argument. It's just something that matters. Alright. Verdict. Keeping the original cast for Power Rangers Zeo would not have automatically made it a masterpiece. Let's be clear about that. The structural limitations of the show, the Sentai adaptation constraints, the episodic writing style, the toy commercial DNA, those don't disappear because Austin St. John and Walter Jones are back in the building. The ceiling of what Power Rangers was willing to be in 1996 was what it was. But the original 3 staying would have done something more important than improving individual episodes. It would have given the franchise a continuity of emotional investment that it never recovered from losing. The reason Zeo lands a little hollow for some fans, even though it's a good season on paper, is the same reason the team never quite feels like a team. The roots aren't there, the history isn't there. You're watching capable new people do good work, but you keep thinking about the people you grew up with. If Jason, Zack, and Trini are present through Zeo and into Turbo, the franchise has a through line, a genuine connective tissue. The new cast, when they arrive, means something different, because you can feel what's being handed to them. And Turbo, which in the real timeline was the weakest version of the Zordon era, might have landed as something genuinely moving. That's the trade-off. Not better individual seasons, a better story across the whole run. And Saban walked away from it in 1994 because of a contract dispute that from this distance looks like one of the worst decisions in the franchise's history. The show survived. It was resilient, and the replacement cast was good. but the version we got was never quite whole. The version we could have had. Here's what I want to know in the comments. If the original 3 had stayed, who gets the Gold Ranger power? Because I think there's actually a real argument for Zack, and I suspect a lot of you are going to push back on that.